Hey everyone, welcome back to the next episode of Game of Crimes with Murph in the Morning. I'm your host, Steve Murphy, retired DEA special agent and 38-year law enforcement professional. If you've seen the Narcos series on Netflix, then you've seen a little bit about my time in the DEA. For our new listeners and viewers on Game of Crimes, a special welcome to you. You've come to the right place to see and hear some of the best true crime content anywhere. Each episode features a guest so you can hear firsthand, real-life, true stories of heroes in action. I'm talking about our law enforcement professionals, our military, and all of our first responders. This is where you'll hear about their dedication to duty, their commitment to excellence, bravery in the face of dangers, and the sacrifices they make to protect all of us. And as an added bonus, you'll occasionally hear from a former bad guy on the show. Now, I know that might sound a little strange, but it gives us all a look from the criminal's perspective, right? And that's what makes Game of Crimes different from so many other true crime podcasts. To all our listeners, thank you all for listening and watching the Game of Crimes. As most of you already know, I'm now posting our guest interviews on YouTube. If you haven't checked that out yet, head on over to YouTube, type in Game of Crimes Podcast in that search bar at the top, see what you think about the show. While you're there, do me a favor, click on that subscribe button, the like button, and feel free to share with all your friends. This little action won't cost you anything other than a minute or two of your time, and it really helps promote the show. Believe me, I know none of this will be possible without your support, and I really appreciate you folks giving me your time. If you like what you're hearing on Game of Crimes, you can get even more content on our Patreon channel. That's at patreon.com/Game of Crimes. There you'll find several bonus episodes each month that cover topics that you most likely won't hear anywhere else. That's patreon.com/Game of Crimes. So now let's head over to meet this week's guest. But before we do, you know what time it is. It's time to get in, sit down, shut up, and hold on. Welcome back to the biggest, baddest, most dangerous game of all, the Game of Crimes. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the next episode of Game of Crimes with Murph in the Morning. What is wrong with you people that you keep coming back? But I love it. I can't tell you how much I appreciate you coming back to the show. And like we do every week, we have a special guest. And this week, it's a little bit of a surprise. I'm learning things as we're doing a little pre-interview here this morning before we started recording. So who knows where we're going to go with this one today. But our guest is an individual who spent 23 years working for the Federal Bureau of Investigation, not as a special agent, which I just learned. That was my surprise this morning, but as what we call a division counsel, chief division counsel. He's an in-house lawyer is what he is. It keeps us all out of trouble. We have the same thing in DEA. Not when I was there, because I don't think they could put enough attorneys in my office to keep me out of trouble. But once I left, then they started putting the attorneys in there, and it all works for the prosecution. It's all for the good of the government, the taxpayers. So very honored to welcome Steve Kramer to the show. Steve, welcome to Game of Crimes, brother.
Hey, thanks, Steve. I really appreciate it. It should be a lot of fun.
It's going to be fun. It's you may not appreciate me so much by the time we finish, but we'll see how it goes. And here's the other thing about Steve. He was not just an attorney with the FBI. He was a former assistant U.S. attorney, right? Assistant U.S. attorney, yeah. And he also worked as what we call a SALSA, a special assistant USA attorney. It's not like a special agent where we ride that short little bus. But I don't know, maybe he did. We're going to find out. But he also worked as a deputy district attorney. And I was doing some research on you, Steve. I saw you worked homicide cases, fraud cases, some international, I guess, terrorism cases, which we probably can't talk too much about here on the show. But what a varied background. I love it. And the thing I really like about this whole thing is this is the first DEA or FBI attorney we've had on the show. Oh. So you're leading the way there, man.
That's awesome.
So for our regular listeners, our next section here, we go into the small town police blotter. This is where we tell a couple of goofy stories about the crazy things criminals do. And I got to read the disclaimer before we get started here. This is a show about crime. We talk about bad people doing bad things. We talk about bad people doing bad things to good people. We take the stories very, very seriously, but we also like to have a lot of fun at the expense of our criminals out there. So we've got stories today. One, Steve is out in California. I'm here in Florida. So we got another one coming from California, Florida today. So, Steve, you're up, brother. Tell us about the stupid things that go on in California.
Okay, I'll just give you the headline: Naked man, 19, carjacked Federal Express truck. Could not figure out how to drive that vehicle.
Jeez.
So this is just recently a naked man who carjacked a Federal Express delivery truck, but then fled the vehicle when he could not figure out how to drive it, has been arrested, according to the California police. Investigators allege that Albert Luna, 19, got into the truck around 7 p.m. on Saturday as the driver, the Federal Express driver, was removing a package from the rear of the vehicle, which was parked in front of the residence in the city of Coachella. Luna demanded the truck's keys, which were turned over by the driver, who cops report ran to a nearby residence and reported the incident. While Luna succeeded in starting the truck, the accused carjacker's getaway was not smooth. He, quote, did not know how to operate the vehicle and fled the area on foot, abandoning the vehicle, end quote, according to police. Based on the information provided by the FedEx driver, the suspect was described as a Hispanic male adult, 18 to 20 years old, thin build, short hair, and not wearing any clothes. Luna, apparently a Coachella resident, was later arrested and charged with carjacking. He's being held in the Riverside County Jail on a felony count. My favorite part is this. It's unclear why Luna was naked when he sought to boost the FedEx truck. Additionally, it is unknown whether his lack of clothing was a drug-related condition. I'm like,
That's probably a good clue.
Yeah, well, I thought that was kind of funny. I'm like, so what drug makes you take your clothes off? I'm sure there's like a lot of people would like to know what that drug is. So pretty funny.
Yeah. For all the wrong reasons.
Exactly. So that's pretty funny though.
You know what?
Not to mention it was probably 115 degrees out there in Coachella on Saturday at 7 p.m. So
is that right? It's a hot place? Huh?
Very hot place.
Well, he was probably thinking ahead because he didn't want to leave any fibers behind that crime scene investigators could come up with and convict him.
They always say they say these criminals are going to get smart and they'll start taking precautions, cleaning themselves up, wiping stuff down, not leaving DNA, not leaving fingerprints. But I'm pretty sure we still get fingerprints from most crime scenes. So
yeah, and DNA.
Yeah, lots of DNA. Else. Yeah, exactly.
All right, buddy. Thank you very much, Steve. Appreciate you doing that. Our next one is from where, guys, state of Florida. Steve, I tell our listeners, you can choose to be a leader. You can choose to be a follower in life. We choose to be leaders here in Florida with the craziest criminal stories. You've heard of Florida Man, right?
Oh, yeah. I was born there.
Oh, where are you? What part?
Fort Lauderdale.
All right. We'll talk about that here in just a minute.
Very good.
So today's story from Florida involves a cheesesteak sandwich. So a patron was arrested after causing a disturbance at a Florida cafe when he was served a Philly cheesesteak sandwich, and this is a crime, on a sesame seed bun, according to the police. Man, what were they thinking, right? I guess that's the Florida version. According to investigators, Joseph Lagana, 27 years old, was collared at the Gun Highway Flea Market in Odessa, which is a suburb of Tampa. As detailed in the affidavit, Lagana began a verbal altercation with a cashier after getting a sesame seed bun on a Philly cheesesteak. Lagana ordered the cheesesteak from Missy Mae's Cafe inside the flea market. The classic Philly cheesesteak typically comes on a smooth, seed-free hoagie bun or a roll. Cops say Lagana, a Southern California native. See, you guys
California connection, exactly.
Exporting your criminals here.
You did say, did he have all his clothes on though?
Yeah, I think he did.
Okay.
But let me tell you, we got enough crazies here already. It's unbelievable. Anyway, Lagana argued with the cashier. He engaged in an altercation with the male who did not wish to press charges for battery. When sheriff's deputies questioned Lagana, he was being loud and argumentative to multiple patrons at the flea market. You can guess what's wrong with Mr. Lagana. He appeared to be heavily intoxicated, evidenced by his slurred speech and loss of fine motor skills. I never heard that one. He was arrested for disorderly intoxication, a misdemeanor. Lagana's rap sheet includes a multitude of arrests for crimes like battery, burglary, criminal mischief, weed possession, probation violation, and grand theft. In a Facebook post, the flea market's proprietors made light of the cheesesteak event, apologizing to the customers for the incident. Quote, whereas a sesame seed bun apparently was insulted and attacked by a young man. Good reason to go to jail, huh?
That's awesome.
I'm just surprised that meth wasn't involved or something like that, because that seems to be what usually happens in some of these articles.
Oh, yeah, I can imagine.
Anyway, that's it for today's small town police blotter. So thank you very much, Steve, for playing along. I actually tried to omit this section from the podcast on the weekly podcast here, and the listeners wrote in, and they actually did a poll on Facebook, and it was overwhelming. Bring it back. So it's like one of our listeners said, if I read the stories and laugh, it's like me laughing at my own jokes. So it's much
it's
better.
good. It's good. I enjoy reading those type of stories. It's funny. One of the things that when I was a prosecutor, we charged our own crimes, that came through, and probably 1 out of 10 cases, a lot of times we get charged just because you get stuff like that, which is crazy. So it was always fun to see like the stuff that you don't hear about in the press is even funnier. Just the way stuff goes down, and like we can't charge that. That's just too funny.
Well, I have a Patreon channel also for Game of Crimes, and one of the monthly sections is you can't make this shit up.
No,
it's all about criminals. So I want our listeners to know how I met Steve here. For our regular listeners, you heard me talk about being in Fort Worth a few weeks ago, going to the Robbery Investigators of Texas conference, the Riot Conference. I'm wearing their shirt today. Another free shirt, by the way. It's into that free 99 price tag that goes along with that. But there's an FBI agent that I've been talking to now for a year or two. I finally got to meet him at the conference, Seth Webb. He's stationed there in Dallas and is involved in genetic investigations. And he told me about Steve Kramer. He actually told me about Steve Kramer and Steve Bush. Is that your partner's name?
Yep, Steve Bush.
And some of the cases. And then he threw something out that this is something that my former co-host Morgan and I discussed, was getting someone on here to talk about the Golden State serial murder case out in California. And you know what we got today, ladies and gentlemen? We got the man that solved that case. You're looking in right. If you're on YouTube, you're looking at him right now. Okay, so we'll get into that in just a minute. But before we do, Steve, I'd like to ask all our guests a little bit about your background. Where are you from? Where you grew up? What some of your family dynamics, brothers, sisters, any cops in your family, where you went to colleges, that kind of thing. So I'll be quiet now. Let you talk for a minute.
Okay, that's pretty wide open.
Yeah.
I've lived all over the country. I think I told you I was born in Florida, and I actually lived in the Bahamas for my first couple of years. My folks were living in the Bahamas when they met. My mom was a volunteer nurse, taking care of the poor in the Bahamas, and my father had just gotten out of the Jesuit seminary. So he had spent 13 years training to be a priest. So he got out, and I guess if you spent 13 years in the seminary, what's the first place you would go? Down to the Caribbean.
It's either that or Disney World.
Yeah. So they met there, and then I was born in Fort Lauderdale. We lived in the Bahamas for a few years, and then we moved back to Florida. And then eventually I lived Texas, Wisconsin, Arizona, Northern California, and now Southern California.
Are you trying to stay ahead of the law here or what?
It seems that way. No, my dad had a few different businesses, so he'd buy different businesses in different parts of the country, and run them for a few years, and then we'd go do something different in another part. So we're mostly in the construction business, like heavy equipment, things like that. But he got involved in commercial real estate in the 1980s in Arizona, and when we had the big real estate crash then in the 80s, there was lots of lawsuits, things like that, as you can imagine. And so my dad spent a lot of time with lawyers. And he became a fan of lawyers, and he pressured me very heavily. I was actually a finance accounting major, double major in college at University of Arizona, and I was planning on being at least as a CPA before going off to Wall Street. So that was my plan, to get an MBA and go do that. But he really wanted, I think, a free lawyer. He wanted a lawyer in the family. So I ended up all right, well, a law degree's not. I'll still get an MBA eventually, I'm sure, but a law degree's not a bad degree to have. So I ended up changing my plans like my senior year and went to law school in San Diego the next year. And my plan was just to get out, work on a couple of cases with my dad, but then eventually go back to Wall Street, because that's kind of what my background was in numbers, finance, things like that. And halfway through law school, I was interviewing for summer internships, and I got an internship at the San Diego District Attorney's Office. And I think I was like one of only 2 people in San Diego at that time to get an internship at the office there. They had budget crises back then. Back in the early 90s, it was pretty tight. And So I ended up taking that job, and the first week on the job, I was handed a motion I believe it was a motion to dismiss on big case, and I ended up writing the motion on it, and then they're like, okay, you're going to court. I'm going to court. Yep, you're going to court. You're going to argue it. Get up there.
As an intern.
Yeah, they have a program called Certified Law Clerks where you're allowed to present cases, present motions, argue them. So you write it, you sign your name. Actually, the prosecutor signs their name to it, but your name goes on it, and then you get to argue it. It's a great training program for new attorneys, law students. So I ended up doing that, and like after the first week in the job there, court a couple of times writing these motions. It was super fun. Like it was really interesting. I spent the summer doing that, and I mean, just imagine I'm 23 years old, and I got activists sitting in my office, 2, 3 guys telling me about this big meth they did and how they arrested this guy, and like, okay, now we have to go argue the motion. And I'm like, and they're all listening to me, all looking at me, and walking over with these detectives and cops to court to go argue a motion. It was super fun, super exciting.
Oh yeah, I bet.
So yeah, so I really like that, and so that's really kind of what I wanted to do. And so after law school, I went back, I tried to get a job at the DA's office, but they weren't hiring at that point in time. So I moved back to Arizona, worked at a firm doing commercial real estate litigation, and then as soon as that freeze went away, they had a freeze on hiring at the DA's office in Phoenix. I applied and got a job as a brand new baby attorney. They're county, they call them deputy county attorneys in Arizona. Same thing as a deputy DA, district attorney. Mm-hmm. So I got a job doing that, and it was great. And so one of the things back when I was in law school, back working for the San Diego DA's office, I was in this thing called law review at law school. Mm-hmm. And when you're on law review, you're supposed to write an article, like a legal article, and if it's good enough, you hit the right topics, they'll publish it. So I ended up writing an article. It got published, and when I was in law school, the DA's office called me up, and they said, Steve, the FBI wants to talk to you about your article. I'm like, really? Yeah. It was an article on DNA.
Were you worried about plagiarism, or?
I definitely was not, because the prosecutor I worked with at the district attorney's office in San Diego, his name was Woody Clark, and he's since passed away, but he was one of thinking about DNA back in the day, he was one of the pioneers in DNA. And so He was kind of my mentor, and he's the one who said, Steve, you should write this article that you have to do for law review. You should write it on DNA. And there was a particular topic on the DNA. So I researched it all, worked with him, and that's how that article got published. But because Woody was at the forefront of DNA and all the issues, like he knew, like, you got to write this article because it'll be a really important article. And sure it was. The FBI calls the DA's office and get a hold of Kramer. You need to talk to him about this article. So it was great. It was really good. So it's been cited a lot since then. And when I interviewed at the Arizona county attorney's office, they had their article. They knew about it. So it was good. So it just gave me a tiny bit of notoriety in the DNA community, a little bit. Very, very little, but helped me get a job. So anyway, I ended up working for the county attorney in Phoenix, and probably one of the best jobs I've ever had. Super fun. I got lucky, and what I did, I ended up doing a trial. One of my very first trials as a baby prosecutor. I did, particularly in government, probably everywhere, everything's a little bit of politics. Mm-hmm. And I happened to do a trial down in the main courthouse at the county attorney's office, where some of the upper management came down and watched one of the new attorneys do a trial. And so I won the trial, fortunately, and they ended up promoting me right away to a vertical unit. And similar to like DEA, FBI, everything's vertical. You take your own case, and as a prosecutor, an investigator, you start at ground zero. You do the investigation, you charge the case. It's your case from cradle to grave.
Right.
Prosecutor offices, like DA's offices, because they have so many, a lot of them have like horizontal prosecutions. Like one group will charge them, one group will try them, another group will handle the appeals. A vertical unit is kind of like the way you do it at the FBI and DEA. It's cradle to grave. You charge your own cases, you try your own cases, and you can even, like, I handle my own appeals. So I was in a vertical unit, and so there I was, 24, 25 years old, and I got a little badge, I got a pager, and I go out in my car, and like in the middle of the night, the pager goes off, and like I have to go to the crime scene. But yeah, I'm just like CSI, go underneath the police tape. I got these seasoned detectives. All right, Kramer, this is what we got. And, like, it was great. And, like, dealing with suspects in custody, and they need to be interviewed. You got victims, some dead, some alive. I mean, as you can imagine, being 25, 26 years old, right in my mid 20s, it was super exciting. It was
Oh
super fun.
yeah,
Yeah, I
yeah.
mean, I loved it. And then go back on Monday and charge the case, indict the case. So it was a lot of fun. It was a really, really fun time. Really enjoyed that.
How old were you when you wrote that article about DNA? And were you at the district attorney's office? I'm assuming you were.
Yeah, I was clerking there in law school. I was about 23 years old. It was 19, that might be 24, 25. Yeah, it was published in 93. And and then I graduated law school like a year later or later
How,
that year.
how did you pick that document or somebody pick it for you? How did you get connected with DNA?
So that was where the Woody Clark connection came in. So Woody Clark, just so you know, he was the DNA prosecutor a year later on the O.J. Simpson case.
Oh,
So
okay.
in fact, like my article was, I don't know if it was an exhibit, but it was part of the argument on DNA in that case, and a lot of cases. So Woody, when I was working for him at the DA's office, that's when I said to him, like, hey, I got to write this article,
Mm-hmm.
made law review at school, and I need to find a topic. And it could be, I mean, any legal topic. You could civil, criminal, whatever you want. And I figured I'd do criminal. I'm like, you have any ideas? And he's like, you're the perfect guy. Like, this is it. Like, I want you to write this article on this particular topic on DNA. And in a nutshell, it was basically early days pre-CODIS. It was about statistical probabilities. Like, is the chance that someone could have randomly the same DNA profile as your suspect, is that different among different races? Is it different among whites versus Hispanics or
Mm-hmm.
blacks, or however you want to do it? And is that some type of bias that should be considered when we did that, or when you do a DNA prosecution? And so I wrote an article explaining what all those statistics meant, and essentially, there's no like there's no meaningful, no significant difference between different ethnic and racial groups when it comes to DNA.
Right, right. I've just got a very general overview of DNA and how it works. But you mentioned CODIS. Can you tell our listeners what CODIS stands for?
Sure. CODIS stands for the Combined DNA Index System. It's actually not a database, it's a software.
Mm-hmm.
CODIS is a software that runs essentially DNA comparisons in a database called NDIS, NDIS. NDIS stands for National DNA Index System, and that's the uh, database that's run by the FBI.
Mm-hmm.
And it has like over, I think, 22, 23 million profiles in it currently. And if you saw it, which
Wow.
I have, my friend Tom Callahan, who's the chief scientist at the FBI, took me in there one time, and it didn't look much bigger than a refrigerator or two. Pretty small, actually.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's pretty cool. But CODIS, in and of itself, and the database NDIS, did not come online, so to speak, until like 1998, 1999, when it
Mm-hmm.
really started. Law enforcement started collecting profiles. But the way it works, like the way NDIS and CODIS works as a national database, you have obviously 50 states, and all 50 states have their own DNA index system, their own database. You have a state database, and sometimes you can, like bigger states will have like different crime labs. We have multiple crime labs in California, and some of them are also accredited for CODIS, and they call those LDIS, local DNA index systems. So, like in
Okay.
Orange County, we have one. Los Angeles, we have one. LAPD, LA Sheriff's Department has one. And then Cal DOJ is the state DNA index system. And what happens is the state DNA index system will share their DNA with the FBI with NDIS. That's
Mm-hmm.
essentially what NDIS is. It's basically taking all these state DNA index databases and putting it into one. So that's essentially the way it is. So when you run DNA on a case, you can run it in your local state database, and you can also run it, nationally in the national DNA index system.
When Woody suggested that topic to you, did you ever imagine it would develop into what it did for you?
Oh no, no,
Holy
not at
cow.
all, not at all, not at all. That was really fun. I had no clue. Like I was just looking to try to get an article published,
Uh-huh.
and I was trying to pick when you're in law school, and like you're trying to in law review, you're trying to find an article that is current. Just like if
Right.
you're to write a magazine or newspaper article or a blog post, you want to write something that is current and has meaning to the issues going on in the day. And so that's what I was just looking for. I just wanted something that was meaningful with the chance to get, because not everybody gets published. And
Right.
so it's hard to do that. So that's what I was looking for. And I figured if you went to an expert like Woody, like he'd have like the cutting edge stuff on it. So I
Smart
did
move.
not I did not anticipate. But the funny part, when we come back to this, I'm sure we'll get to it, is that article, like, it was great. It helped me out in the beginning when I started my career. And then I didn't really do a lot too much with DNA. Maybe a couple of cases we had DNA on, but did not do a ton with DNA after that, particularly when I first started at the FBI. But that was one of the reasons I got into the Golden State Killer investigation. So
Yeah. So when you get together with Woody now, do you buy all his drinks?
so he, like I said, he ended up doing the O.J. Simpson case, the DNA on that, and it was so persuasive. They essentially conceded, like, yeah, the DNA, that's O.J. Simpson's DNA. There was no issue with that. And if you remember that case, the argument that they made was, well, the police planted it or it was contaminated. Nobody challenged the validity that it was O.J. Simpson's DNA.
Right.
So that was a big success on that. Now, so Woody actually, Clark ended up becoming a judge in San Diego County, and then I forget exactly, but he ended up passing away a few years later. But I always mention him because that was the whole reason I got into DNA, and then later that literally was the reason I got involved in the Golden State Killer case.
Yeah. Just going back to your family briefly, do you have any brothers and sisters that are in law enforcement or lawyers or anything like that?
I have a brother and sister, both younger than me. My brother is actually, he works for the county attorney's office in Phoenix, Maricopa County Attorney's Office, as a deputy county attorney. So
Nice.
he's in law enforcement, and that's it as far as my family. We don't really have anybody else in law enforcement in our family.
Yeah, and there's one other statement you made there I want to just clarify, because you said you were lucky on a case. There, I don't believe in luck or coincidence. You're being humble. You obviously had the knack for being a litigator, to where you could go in at a very young age with no experience and argue a case in front of a judge, in front of a courtroom. That's called talent. I think that's a calling that you had, and it developed into a great calling, even in your life after the FBI. And we'll get to that here in a little while. But I don't believe in luck. You're the man.
I appreciate that. It's funny that I just thought of it as you mentioned it. That first hearing that I told you about, there was an appeal on that, and we ended up doing the appeal and winning the appeal, but we ended up getting a transcript of it. It was pretty funny. At the end of my internship, I took that transcript and I took it back to the judge and hey, will you sign this? This is the first time I've ever been in court, and I have a transcript. So he wrote it. He's like, hey, great job, Steve, on it. It was
that's
funny.
nice.
So it's funny.
That's
I went
nice.
back like a year ago. I found it in one of my files and I read it. It was pretty funny to read stuff that you did like 30 years ago. And I'm like, isn't too bad. They did okay in court. So it was
especially
funny.
Your first time.
Yeah, it's funny. But yeah, no, I appreciate that. But yeah, there's a little bit of luck involved, I'm sure. But
yeah, no, I don't think so. But it is funny what you mentioned, because I've had a couple cases make it all the way to Supreme Court, and those are the ones that the AUSA's. Actually, the AUSA I worked on with one in North Carolina after I came back from South America. I think the last time I checked, he's the first assistant. So, which makes, for our listeners, makes him the number 2 guy in a U.S. Attorney's office, whatever district they're assigned to. And they're in, this particular individual's in the Middle District of North Carolina. And he would keep me updated. Hey, this is being argued over these points. And then when we won, he sent me a copy of the final judgment from the Supreme Court. And things like that just make you feel like, wow, I had a case that made it all the way up there. Recognition, you don't recognize the investigator at all. I'm kind of guessing they probably don't even recognize the attorneys, the prosecutors, by name.
Yeah, but I think a lot of times you'll have your name attached on the appellate briefs and things like that. Your name will be on there. Like, I've had a couple published to the Supreme Court, and I know plenty of attorneys. It's a big thing. When I was at the U.S. Attorney's office, another example, like when I was a baby USA, I was a special assistant U.S. attorney, and one of my first cases I had to do an appeal on it to the Ninth Circuit, had to go argue that. It got published. And so it was pretty funny because I was the first one in my class at the U.S. Attorney's office of all the new attorneys to get published. And that's a big deal to get published. Even though, like you said, there's no real press on it. Your name's just attached at the bottom of it. But yeah, it's always kind of cool to do that. But I mean, so even if it's like your name's not on it, but it's your case in front of the Supreme Court, that's That's pretty awesome, actually. Like I've never had
Abs-
anything close to that. That's amazing.
Yeah, it was. It was. You first get the phone call because you're usually arguing constitutional issues. You're thinking, "Oh crap, what did I do? What did I do wrong here?"
Oh
But
yeah,
when everything is affirmed, it just makes you feel so much better. But another thing is, you're down in the Ninth Judicial Circuit, which is infamous for not being the let's say the most pro law enforcement district in the country.
right. Yeah, it's a little more liberal, yeah, when it comes to that. Yeah.
Yeah, like a whole like 180 degrees separate from everybody else.
Right. Exactly.
So
Well, I mean, I will say, like, particularly, like, when at the U.S. Attorney's Office, which is the federal prosecutor's office, like, if you can get something firmed in the Ninth
mhm.
Circuit, like a law enforcement technique or the way you do something, that's pretty powerful because,
Yep.
like, everyone's like, hey, if the Ninth Circuit said it's okay, then it's probably good for the rest of the country.
Yeah, all the rest of the circuits have approved that years ago, but
Right.
no, you're
Right.
right, and it sets precedents within that circuit so that future cases can refer back to it. Love telling a lawyer what you already know. That's great, isn't it? Having an old
No,
retired cop. But this is all good stuff. I love it. Where did you go to law school out there?
I went to Cal Western in San Diego. Um,
Nice
San
place.
Diego. Yeah, it was great. I did it. It was like I told you earlier. It was they had like a two that you could accelerate your law school there and go in the summertime because that was my plan. Get out, go to law school, help my dad out, and then go to Wall Street. So that was the plan. But then I kind of got derailed into this uh, district attorney
Yeah.
route and doing criminal law. So that kind of
Well,
became my passion at the time.
yeah, you might not be as wealthy as you would have been if you were on Wall Street, but you serve the public, and that's extremely admirable in my book.
Well, yeah, it's fun. I ended up going like so. A few years later, I ended up moving to Orange County, California. I ended up
Hmm.
getting married. My wife worked in Orange County, and I'd already passed the California bar, so I had the Arizona bar license, and I had a It was much easier to go back to California since I had a license there. And then I applied for this job at the FBI, which was a really interesting job. It was to be a field attorney for the FBI Los Angeles division, Los Angeles field office. And when I was a county attorney, a deputy county attorney in Arizona, one time I was in court and I was sitting in court and this guy came down and sat down next to me. I'm like, what are you doing? He goes, oh, you got to present. I'm the attorney, in-house attorney for Phoenix Police Department, and like I'm here to. There was some issue with one of the detectives or something like that. I'm like, that's really cool. Like you're attorney, because I worked with cops all the time at the crime scenes with them, and obviously you become buddies with everybody. And like, so I enjoyed like the investigative part of it, and I really enjoyed working with them and trying to solve these cases in addition to prosecuting them. I'm like, that is really cool. You get to work with all the cops and handle their issues. And he goes, yeah. So I thought that was just a kind of I'm like I'd like that job, and then like a year later pops up with the FBI. Like okay, that'd be a cool job. I get to be an attorney, but I also get to work with FBI agents. This would be
Hmm.
awesome. So I ended up applying to that job and going through a long interview process, and eventually talked my way into the job.
Yeah.
And so yeah, so it was good. It was a great job to get into and uh, start my next phase of my career. That was kind of the very beginning how I got into the FBI.
Are those positions, and I don't give too much information, but are they paid on the GS pay scale?
That's correct.
Oh, how
Yes.
about that?
Yeah. Yeah. So
All right.
that was the other thing too. It was a lot of times it's asked, well, why didn't you become an agent? Well, they brought me into very top, like at the top of the GS scale. So because what the FBI wanted to do, and particularly the attorney there, his name was Louis Flores. He was the chief division counsel, and back then the FBI director was Louis Free. And Louis Free's
Hmm.
like, why do I have all these special agents? The Office of General Counsel. These are all like agents, even though they're attorneys. Why are they here practicing law? I want them out investigating cases. Like we can hire practicing attorneys to handle all the legal work. So he pushed
Yep.
out in the mid late '90s, pushed out a lot of the attorneys out of the Office of General Counsel and
Smart.
put in specialized attorneys from the private sector. And so my eventual boss, Louis Flores at the FBI in Los Angeles, said, I think we had 4 or 5 attorneys. Like, why are we like? Yeah, these. I mean, we only have 100. I think it was about 1,200. I forget the number. Maybe or between. I think it was around 1,000 agents in LA at the time. I could be wrong.
Wow.
Maybe it was a little less than that, but uh, maybe it was 700, 800. I forget. But why do we have like 5 attorneys that are special agents when they could be out investigating cases? So he's like, we should bring in same thing like they did at headquarters. Like, why don't we bring in some non-agent attorneys? So that was kind of the idea behind that.
Mm-hmm.
And so I went through the interview process, and I got the job along with another colleague who was from a big firm in Los Angeles. So she came in, and I came in, and so we were the first 2 non-agent attorneys in the FBI field office. And it was a big deal, because you could probably imagine that the special agents at the time probably weren't real happy having like somebody from the outside, somebody that wasn't a special agent, being there, that they had to go to for advice and things like that. Because it's much easier to go talk to an attorney who's a special agent, who's gone through Quantico and done everything that you've done. They carry a gun and all that. I totally get that. But at the same time, most attorneys, the special agent attorneys, stay at that job for a couple of years, and they go back and then they start working cases again. And so
Yeah.
the idea was to have specialized skill, have a fair degree of previous experience as an attorney, so you could actually cover these issues in a real way with the agents. So obviously, like myself and there's several other non-agent attorneys in the FBI office as well as other field offices, and I think they're very well accepted, their advice. And that became, it's actually and you probably know this, Steve, like having in-house counsel like at a law enforcement department is really, really, really both for like, am I allowed to do this XYZ? Yes or no? Getting legal approval to do that. I always say our job really was mostly CYA, because agents like to write on their paperwork like, this was approved by legal,
Yeah.
which is good. But also it's good to have somebody that would call the prosecutor's office for you. Like, hey, I want to go talk to the prosecutor. They're giving me a hard time about this case. They're not doing anything. Will you come with me, or will you call the prosecutor?
Yep.
So we did a lot of that too. And so it was always good to have an advocate as a special agent there, which is nice. And as a special agent, your chain of command is really strict. Like, you got to go to your supervisor, and then they go to your assistant special agent in charge all the way up. Whereas the lawyers, we were already kind of at the top of the hierarchy, reporting to the head of the office, the SAC, or the assistant director in charge. And so, like, it was easy for me to pick up the phone, call the supervisor, prosecutor, whoever it was. So that aspect was, I think, really helpful for agents.
Right. And it's probably, I'm sure it's the same thing with amongst the lawyers, like it is with law enforcement, where if I'm talking to another cop, we have more in common, and there's already somewhat of a respect and trust. You may be limited at that point because you're just getting to know each other, but you already have an element of that. Whereas I would think it would be the same with prosecutors. Whereas, some of the offices I've been assigned to, I've been fortunate to work with a lot of really good AUSAs over the years. Not always, though. And they kind of look at agents as second-class citizens, or just flat-foot grunts, all we are, and don't know crap about the law. So it does give you a large amount of credibility to bring that case in front of an AUSA. But the fact that you've got the litigation and prosecutorial experience behind you, that really, in my eyes, bumps you up a level of trust when it comes to the investigators themselves. I remember the first time I met a division counsel with DEA, I think it was in Atlanta, and I didn't know them, and I'm looking at him just another lawyer that couldn't got. What I'm looking at him is a lawyer who couldn't find a job in private practice anywhere, so they came and worked for the government. But then once you see what their capabilities are, and you realize they're not there to hurt you, they're there to make sure you do everything right, so that when you go to court, you win your cases. Who wants to spend all that time and effort and not win every case you have? So it's, I think it was, and the fact that Louis Freeh came up with the idea to put the agents back out on the street to be agents and bring attorneys in to be attorneys, I think that's phenomenal. I think that's a good forward-thinking idea he came up with there. So
it made a lot of sense. And if you can imagine spending 10 years, 20 years, I spent 23 years in that position, and the other attorneys in my unit that came in at the same time or after, I mean, you build up a lot of institutional knowledge. So for me, it was interesting because the first week on the job, like I said, you report to the assistant director in charge of the office. So the first week on the job, you're getting pulled into all the executive meetings with the head of the office. Like
Mm-hmm.
it was commonplace. Like the assistant director would walk into your office, say, "Hey, Steve, come here, I got a question," or the assistant director would come and sit down in your office with you. So you were having this daily and weekly interaction with the executives, in
Yep.
the office. In Los Angeles, we had 4 special agents in charge, plus
Wow.
assistant director. So we're always like sitting down and listening to all the problems that go through, the executive management. So imagine like doing that for 20 plus years, like seeing like, all these different issues go through. So then you have, later in my career, you'd have special agents in charge or assistant directors, that just got promoted to that job. And I've been in the bureau probably longer than they have. And they walk in and they have an issue come up. And I've probably seen that issue 5 times.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I know the answer to it.
Yeah.
And this is the way you have to handle it. And I can tell you so many times, and you know this really well. They're like, no, 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 I know how to do this. I'm the special agent in charge. And I'm like, I'm telling you, you got to go this way. And they
Yep.
want to go that way. It's funny, but that was a very frustrating part, is because it built up all that institutional knowledge. And I say that, I mean, that was not the norm. Obviously, they appreciated having, attorneys there that had
Absolutely.
seen these issues before, but it was difficult to say, like, yeah, I've been doing this since day one in the bureau, these type of issues. So
Yeah. Yeah.
it was, but like you'd have a lot of, and I liked it because you have a lot of special agents in charge and assistant directors that would come in, and they really leaned on you, like, and they enjoyed. I think having that legal institutional knowledge of the policies and the players and stuff like that
Yep.
made it a lot easier for them. And like I said, like ultimately, like my job, jokingly but partly serious, was like CYA. Like our lawyer looked at this and good,
Right.
and that carries a lot of weight. So like when you have an office can feel confident like in their position and go argue it. So yeah, it was a really cool experience. I actually, after like 10 years or so, I moved from the Los Angeles office down to Orange County to our what we call the resident agency, the satellite office in Orange County, because I actually prefer I prefer working cases. I prefer
Mm-hmm.
sitting with the agents and dealing with the day-to-day issues. I just find that much more interesting. But
Yeah.
I was going to tell you earlier, when I was up in LA, I was right across the street from UCLA. And so I actually applied to business school and got accepted to the business school at UCLA. And so like I would come in early in the morning and work, and then I'd go to classes at 3 in the evening, and like I ended up doing my MBA, and I was all set to leave. I was done. I had 5 years or so in the bureau, or 4 years, 3 or 4 years, and I was like, okay, cool. I'll put in my time. I'm going to go to Wall Street, and had interviewed, the big firms on Wall Street. I was all set to go, and talking about job offers and things like that, and then 9/11 happened, and that kind of threw a big wrench
Ah.
in it. In fact, it was really funny when I was interviewing with these big investment banks. All they wanted to talk about was 9/11 and the FBI investigation. Like they didn't want to talk about finance. Like, tell me, like, what happened that day and how'd you guys do it? Like, it was really interesting. Like, that's all they wanted to talk about. So it was
Yeah.
pretty funny. And I'm sure the same thing at DA, but like at the bureau, like the mission, like changed within 24 hours at the bureau. Like at that
Oh
point
yeah.
in time, it was like everybody's focused on this. And for weeks after 9/11, it was everybody was working 7 days a week,
Mm-hmm.
and you're excited to go to work. You're excited to
Yeah.
get this mission. Everyone was super focused. So that kind of like reinvigorated um, me to like really do like this. And it's now the finance Wall Street stuff seems really boring. So
Yeah.
I ended up staying and don't have any regrets whatsoever.
Excellent.
But that was like kind of pushed me over the edge.
You were talking about the titles there, that there were 4 special agents in charge, which we call SACs, and ASACs, Assistant Special Agent in Charge, and Group Supervisor, GS. But you mentioned the Assistant Director. Tell us what the acronym is for that position.
So and most FBI field offices have a special agent in charge. FBI, we call them SACs, DEA,
Mm-hmm.
and other agencies call them SACs. I don't know why, like, sometimes we use the acronym, sometimes we come up with a phrase for it, but the 3 largest offices, Los Angeles, Washington, and New York, instead of having just an SAC, they have to put in another title, a higher title, and that's the assistant director in charge, and we call that an ADIC. Yes, that's
Yep.
it. You were an ADIC. Who's the ADIC? And that's
Oh,
like, yeah. So that's it. You're ADIC Murphy.
I had the reason I'm laughing is because I had some things at DOJ where we kind of went head to head against the bureau, and they brought in an ADIC, and they told me the title. It just fit that person perfectly.
No, that's funny.
So,
That's funny.
anyway, I just had to throw it out there. I love our FBI brothers and sisters. We give the bureau a hard time, but it's all at the management level. It's a lot worse than it is at the worker bee level. Most of the time we get along together pretty good at the worker bee level. So I want to get a little bit more into why we're here today, and thank you for sharing your background with us. Just like in a Reader's Digest version, what is DNA and genetic genealogy? How would you describe those?
Well, DNA is, people call it like building blocks of life, right?
Mm-hmm.
And DNA is what makes any organism, and different from it, a banana. A banana has super complex DNA, really complex DNA, and more genes than the human has. But DNA is essentially in humans, it's 3 billion base pairs of what we call nucleotides, the A's and the G's and the T's and the C's that you hear about. DNA traditionally, and I'll say, I won't go back prior to CODIS because there's a little bit different techniques they use prior to CODIS, but CODIS uses something called a short tandem repeat. A short tandem repeat is a repetition of a series of these nucleotides. So all of us have like 99.9% of our DNA is the same, but we do have tiny little differences. The CODIS profile, the DNA profile, looks at what we call these short tandem repeats, or I'll call them STRs for short.
Okay.
And they go to specific locations on the genome where you would have these STRs, and like it could be something as simple as like AAA or ATCA, ATC or ATC, ATC, and you have that ATC repeated 4 times or 10 times. That's what you use for the STR. We have a 4 on that STR. We have a 10 on that STR, and you do that now that you go up to 20 different STR locations. So you have a 4, a 10, 11, a 16, an 8, and you do that all the way up to 20, right? And what are the odds of somebody else having all 20, 4, 8, 10, 16, 8, all the way up? Pretty unlikely. Like how big is a Powerball? 5 numbers, 6 numbers, right?
6 plus the Powerball, I think. I think that's what it is.
5 plus the Powerball or 6 plus? All right,
yeah, something like that.
6. Okay. What are the odds of winning the Powerball? 1 out of 292 million.
Wow.
Basically like 1 out of every adult person in the country. That's 1 person in the country could get it, right? 192 million. That's using like 6 numbers, right?
Wow.
Imagine CODIS. We're not using 6 Powerball numbers. We're using 20 Powerball numbers. Okay.
Wow.
And it's actually more than that, but but it's for the sake of this example, it's 20. Okay. So the odds of somebody having those same numbers as you are incredibly unlikely. Like in the Golden State Killer, it was 1 out of 47.5 septillion. It's 47.5 with like 23 zeros after it. 47.5 with 23 zeros after it. So incredible, more than any people that ever lived on Earth ever. So these odds are really incredible that you could have a random match like that. So an STR is really, really useful for finding out the DNA belongs to you, or it belongs to me, or it belongs to another person.
Right.
That's why it's such a powerful identification tool. But it's only good for identification is if you know who it belongs to.
Right.
Because if you just find an STR like on a coffee cup, you can get the STR and you got 20 numbers. They're meaningless unless you can compare it. That's what CODIS is, right? You take that STR profile, and CODIS only takes STRs. It doesn't take anything else. You put it in, and if somebody else, say they had gotten arrested or got convicted and they put their DNA in it, then the STR would match. But if they're not in CODIS, it'll just go in as what we call a forensic unknown. It's unknown. We don't know who did it. Now, it might match to if the guy committed multiple crimes, like, oh yeah, he raped a woman 2 years earlier, and they put it into CODIS, didn't match anybody, so it became a forensic unknown. Now you have another crime. They put it in there. It doesn't match anybody by name, but it actually matches that crime scene. Now we know, okay, this guy's done 2 different crimes, 2 different times, 2 different locations. So that's what an STR is all about. And then eventually maybe somebody gets arrested and they take their DNA and it matches that STR, and then he gets eventually arrested for those 2 crimes. Or, you run an investigation, you think it's him, and then you go, take that person's DNA, put it into CODIS, you query CODIS to see if it matches. And if it does, now you got your guy.
Yeah.
So that's the way DNA works on the law enforcement front with STRs. And STRs, like I said, they're just a profile of, just a small snippet of your genome. Very, very, very tiny snippet. Remember, you have 3 billion base pairs, and we're talking 20 of those pairs.
Wow.
Yeah.
I think I'd read somewhere it was 99.9, and now it'd be 27 nines out past that accurate or a match. But it's also
the accuracy. Yeah, I mean it's pretty. It's very. I mean, I don't know how you get more conclusive. Remember, like
right.
We're talking reasonable doubt in a courtroom, and there's lots of things that we use for reasonable doubt that never even approach 99%.
Right. Right.
There's lots of things that can be 95%, and that's beyond a reasonable doubt.
Yeah.
So like, when you're talking that specific, it's actually very incredible. That's why it's an amazing tool for law enforcement.
Right.
But the key, think about this, it's not an investigative technique, it's an identification technique. And that's the difference between forensic genetic genealogy, which is what we did in Golden State Killer. That becomes an investigative technique, not an identification. They're 2 different things. It's an investigative technique.
Yeah. And DNA is very similar to fingerprints in that matter, because in that way, that if you don't have an identified fingerprint in the database, you can collect all the fingerprints you want at the crime scene, but if you don't have something to match it to positively identify who that belongs to, it's just like you say, it's an unknown.
Yeah, so. It's exactly like that. It's exactly like the fingerprint.
Yeah. Hey players, this is the end of part 1. Part 2 comes out as always on Tuesday. In the meantime, Game of Crimes is now posting interview videos on YouTube. You can find those at Game of Crimes Podcast, and I ask that you click on the subscribe and like buttons. On social media, check us out on Facebook and Instagram at Game of Crimes Podcast, and on X at Game of Crimes. Also on Facebook, type in Game of Crimes fan page and join us for some fun. Our website is gameofcrimespodcast.com. We've got a lot more information there, including all our episodes, the book list, which contains the books written by our guests, Game of Crimes merchandise, and more. And for more content, join us on patreon.com/Game of Crimes. I have several monthly episodes that range from silly to serious, so come on over and join the fun. In the meantime, everyone stay safe. We'll see you tomorrow for part 2.